It is Friday, March 8th. Let's talk PlayStation. As a reminder, your PlayStation Plus games for the month of March 2019 is Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered and The Witness. You have until April 1st to download those games. I think we'll do this every single week, just a quick reminder about what's available on PlayStation Plus now that it's only one platform, and presumably moving forward it's only 2 games, which is rather unfortunate. But if you enjoy the quick reminder every single week, let me know. If not, we can just take that out of the show, no problem. Now to our first news story. PS4 Firmware 6.50. Sony stealthily released this firmware just yesterday. We are assuming that it has PSN name changes, but that's not the case. We're still waiting on that feature. There's 3 main things in this firmware. So number 1, remote play for iOS devices. So you can head to the iOS App Store, download Remote Play. You can now do that with iPhone. There's also the Nico Nico app. You can actually set it to 720p now. This is only for certain territories. And then the last feature, again, only for certain territories, but you can swap the X and circle button when navigating menus on the main PS4 UI, because in a region like Japan, for example, circle is to enter and X is to back. So it's kind of reversed there. Now in that territory, there's the option to switch it back to how we are used to it in the West, where X is to enter and circle is to go back. Yeah, really interesting though, because we're still waiting on those name changes. Sony said that was going to be, it was in early beta testing, and some people have talked to me about it. They've had the feature. They've said it has worked okay for them. You know, they said it would be due in early 2019. There's not much left of early 2019, so who knows when that's going to come. Maybe 6.50 has laid out that groundwork for it to be released, you know, worldwide afterwards, of maybe an incremental, very small firmware update after the fact. The remote play is interesting though, and I find it to be an interesting parallel given that Vita is now over, right? And so that was like kind of the dream remote play device. It's been available on Android with just Xperia devices, which is unfortunate for Android users because nobody really has an Xperia device. But it's not all that great on iOS either. It's only limited to your home network, so you can't really go outside of your home and do this over cellular. You can't use DualShock 4, which is also pretty puzzling. You can use controllers that are natively supported through iOS, but you can't use an official DualShock 4 from Sony with this application. Apparently there's like a little workaround you can do that's kind of a pain in the ass, but otherwise it's very limited right now. But it does tell you that Sony is still highlighting remote play in some way, shape, or form, and still trying to keep it a little bit relevant given that Vita is now over, which segues us nicely into our next news story about PlayStation Vita. Now, I believe it was just last week or maybe the week before where we talked about how the Japanese website for Sony, they updated that Vita shipments would be ceasing soon. Well, now it's confirmed. Now it's over. So shipments are complete. No more PlayStation Vita. It is officially done. What more else can we say every time we talk about Vita? What a great platform, and what a shame that it didn't do as well as it could have. Now, if anything, I will say I did make that video about a few months ago, or 1 or 2 months ago. PlayStation Vita in 2019. This is why you should buy one. Now, this is it. Get one. If you have ever had any interest in buying one, definitely is now the time to pick it up. I believe PlayAsia.com still has a few brand new ones, and some of the Japanese specific colors like aqua blue, and there's the red one. I think it's in silver as well. Definitely a good buy, I'm telling you. Vita is such a great platform. Now let's move on to Days Gone, because if you didn't see, a lot of press and YouTubers got their hands on with Days Gone, playing the first 3 hours of the game. And of course, Sony Ben is doing a lot of PR and interviews and stuff like that, because we're getting, you know, closer and closer to April, the game's release date. So they do have to kind of talk about why this game is going to be so great. And there's a lot of good first impressions. A lot of people are really enjoying it. The game's director, John Garvin, was talking to Eurogamer, and he had this to say about the world of Days Gone and how you can actually find out a little bit about how the world, that universe came to be. So he was actually quoted as saying, "There's a storyline called World's End, and if you explore the open world, you're going to find so many signs of what happened. You'll find sign of Nero, which is the National Emergency Response Organization. It's kind of like our version of FEMA mixed with NSA, and they have checkpoints that are abandoned, and they have refugee camps and mass grave sites, and trains where they hauled in all the corpses from the cities for mass burial out in the wilderness. You're going to be able to find all kinds of information about what happened as the world was ending, about what research they were doing on the first infected subjects. Eventually, you'll see that there's still choppers flying around in the open world today, and you can follow them and spy on them, and just learn all sorts of information, so there's still a lot of answers out there for the player that wants to track them down." Now, it's also been revealed that there's about 240 collectibles to get in the open world when you're sort of running around, just exploring a little bit, which seems like a pretty healthy amount for an open world game. I mean, we won't really know the full scale and scope of the game until we get it ourselves, but 240 seems like a pretty good amount. Seems like you'll be busy for most of this game. Now, we were actually given a ballpark figure about how long it would take to complete the main storyline missions and maybe a little bit of side stuff, and that was about 30 hours is what Sony Ben was saying. Now, in relation to that figure, a new revelation is saying that there's about 6 hours of cinematics in the game. that proves to you just how story heavy and narrative this game is, if it wasn't already proven to you by that recent trailer about Deacon's wedding. So that's, I mean, I'm telling you, this game's looking really good. I don't know if it's going to be, I'm not going to be one of those people that goes, oh yeah, there's going to be just another banger, another 9.0 across the board for all these review sites, but I'm telling you, it just seems like a lot of people are resting on this game or not really giving it the attention that I think it probably deserves, given the gameplay we've been seeing, some of the interviews. I mean, it looks like it's really shaping up to be a pretty enthralling experience. And, you know, Sony Bend needs it to be an enthralling experience because, you know, this is their new IP. They're kind of really laying out their passion project here after wrapping up Golden Abyss, you know, that far back on the PlayStation Vita, and apparently they've started and stopped a few other projects up until they finally settled on Days Gone. And from what we're seeing so far, and the fact that we're also getting really close to the game's release, now I'm getting pretty pumped. So let's get into E3 2019, because we know Sony's not going to be there, and that's kind of like a big thing because Sony takes up so much floor space, and of course people want Sony to have a conference, and we're kind of over that. But now EA won't be there as well. They will not be holding a press conference, and they're just going to be doing a bunch of live streams, more or less. I mean, now this makes sense for EA as well. They don't have a whole lot on their plate. There's a lot of, you know, big franchises under EA's belt that we're not going to be seeing a release for in 2019. It seems like we're getting to a point where a lot of publishers are in this really tough spot, and Sony themselves, where because we're in a generational leap of having next-gen consoles announced somewhat soon or relatively soon, and then getting a release in 2020, the current slate for some publishers and their release schedule is looking just as tough as where Sony is right now. So EA is one of them. And that's, you know, I mean, EA is the one publisher where it's like, I don't think people are really going to miss them. Their E3 shows are typically the most boring, the worst ones to watch, because it's filled with sports stuff and put in all these IP that some people just don't care about. You're watching it for like the 15 to 20 minutes of big IP like Battlefield or something that shows up, or Star Wars, whenever it's relevant, and certainly it's not going to be anytime soon, given that EA is not going to be there. So, if anything, the story is just more telling about E3 in general, because now we've got two major players that aren't showing up to the trade show this year. And, you know, a lot of people have been sort of predicting the death of E3 and how it's getting more and more relevant as all these publishers, developers, and hardware manufacturers, you know, use their own events and deliver news in their own way, whether that's Nintendo Direct style or blog posts, press releases, what have you. They're just kind of doing their own thing. The public can go to E3 now, so now you're in a situation where you don't have as many retailers going to the event and figuring all that stuff out, because that's kind of what E3 was, you know, 15, 20 years ago. It's just not like that anymore. But the thing is, I really think this is just a situation where it's that generational leap. E3 2020, you know EA is going to be there. You know Sony's going to be there, because that's going to be quite a big event where you've got next-gen hardware either being shown off, or, you know, you've got all these the first wave of next-generation titles being displayed. I think it's just a 2019 thing, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, while we're talking about EA, I'm sure you saw this coming, but apparently Anthem is breaking and crashing people's PS4s. Many people are reporting this as a widespread issue, happening multiple times. You know, not really good press for this game, given that, you know, it got I'd say mixed positive reviews. Certainly you've got a situation where the game's not certainly being deemed outstanding, but a lot of people are enjoying their time with it. It seems very divisive. I mean, some people are, you know, can't stand it or hate it or this, that, and the other, and some people are really enjoying their time with the game. Well, anyway, if you are enjoying your time with the game, you may have run into this issue. Well, EA's head of live service, Chad Robertson, recently took to Twitter to just mention that the issue has been identified and the patch will be due this coming week. So hopefully, if you are experiencing this, you won't have to deal with it that much longer. Now, this goes nicely in our next news story about refunds for Anthem. Now, Sony is notoriously difficult for getting refunds on purchases on PSN. It's policy. They're really tough. They often don't give out, you know, refunds just willy-nilly if you don't like the game, this, that, and the other. It has to be pretty substantial. Well, many people are reporting, given the circumstances of Anthem, people are successfully getting refunds from Sony representatives. I guess it depends on the rep that you get when you call, but if you do want to refund this game, you might want to go ahead and give it a try. So Death Stranding. Looks like we may not get a release date for this game anytime soon. Given what Kojima recently told J-Wave Development, he basically said that the game is a little bit behind schedule. He didn't say by much, but more or less what the team's working on right now and kind of what their schedule is. It's just not as far along as they were hoping. It's very vague. You know, we kind of have to draw our own conclusions here. That's Kojima, of course. He's not going to tell us anything concrete, but we were kind of speculating on this channel for a little bit, like that maybe the release date will be soon, but the reason why he's not telling us that release date is because they're not quite sure, they're not quite confident that they're going to, hit that target, and I think that's, here you go, like that's why, right? The fact that they're now a little bit behind schedule and they're admitting that kind of tells you that maybe our initial hunch was correct, that's why they weren't giving us a release date, because they weren't confident about hitting that, which is great. I mean, I love when developers, and especially when publishers certainly, are more lenient on the deadlines and don't put the date out there a year, 2 years in advance. We are really seeing a good change in the industry within the last 2-3 years now, where most developers are hitting their release dates because they're not giving those dates until they know that they're actually going to hit them. So that's fine. That's fine with me. But once Kojima has a release date, that gives us the confidence of knowing that whenever we hear whatever that infamous date is, they're probably going to hit it. Now, PlayStation Classic, we haven't talked about it in a few weeks because there's really no reason to. I mean, came out at $100, half-assed effort. We did our review and whatnot. Basically said, yeah, it's not that great. Much like everybody else did. But, the prices have been going down and down and down. Well, it's at an all-time low of $40. A few retailers are offering $40 as the new low for PlayStation Classic. I believe Walmart's one of them. And, of course, they're in abundance. It's not hard to find one, really. But $40 is, I think, a pretty good deal for it now. I mean, honestly, I can't see it going much lower than that. If it does, and then, wow, they manufactured a lot of these things, and stores bought a lot of them, and they don't know what to do with them if it goes lower than $40, but certainly 40 is a pretty good range. I mean, if it came out at $40, I feel like a lot of people probably would have been like, oh yeah, it's pretty good. It's not bad, it's not great, certainly, but if it comes out at $40 and people know that you can mod it up and load it up with 100 games and ROMs and whatnot and toy around with it, because that's really what you want to do with this thing at the end of the day. Much like what everybody else did with the NES Classic, SNES Classic, any other plug-and-play little micro console. I mean, that's what you do with these things. And so at $40, I feel like it's a pretty good buy. The best thing about it is the shell, because it just looks so cool. It looks very much like an original PlayStation, true to every single little aspect of it. Like, that's the best part about it. Not necessarily what's preloaded onto it, or anything like that, but just how cool the actual little case looks. I mean, that's why you buy those things, because everyone's like, oh, get a Raspberry Pi, and just, why get a PlayStation? You buy the PlayStation Classic because it's the nostalgia factor of the design of the box. You don't buy it as a true answer to backwards compatibility. You don't buy it as a true way to play, the 20 preloaded PS1 games. You buy it to mess around with it, and you buy it for the case. So at $40, not a bad deal. Moving on to something found on Twitter this past week, and I love when stuff like this happens on Twitter. That's like one of the best reasons to be on Twitter, for like small scenarios like this. But basically, a conversation on Twitter was going around about, Back to the Future's original name and what it could have been. And then Cory Barlog, director of the recent God of War 2018, chimed in with a joke about what God of War would have been called. But then the original God of War creator, David Jaffe, chimed in with what God of War actually, this was a true story of what it actually would have been called. And it was apparently... the name was pulled out of a hat. So the studio had 3 names that they were going with this game, and they couldn't decide what it would be, whether it was God of War, At the Hands of the Gods, or Dark Odyssey. They couldn't decide between those 3. I guess the team was pretty divisive. They threw those names in a hat, and they pulled out God of War. And that is what determined this long-standing, very successful PlayStation franchise. I love little fly-on-the-wall stories like that, or it's just little details, That's pretty interesting. And it's funny to see big multi-million-dollar decisions more or less made in that kind of manner, because the naming convention for your product is a pretty big deal, certainly. And so, we could be in a situation where we'd have Dark Odyssey or At the Hands of the Gods, which I honestly don't think are totally bad names. At the Hand of Gods, I think, is actually pretty dope. But we're just so used to it being called God of War, so I love stuff like that. Now, this next news story, it's a little bit old, but it's picking up some traction, and I thought we could talk about it. But this guy, Eric David Scales, I guess he was selling homebrewed, jailbroken PS4s on eBay, whatever they were exactly, but I guess they were preloaded with some games, and the guy was claiming that you could buy a PS4 and not have to buy games anymore and stuff like that, and so he's trying to profit off of this on eBay. Sony, of course, not a big fan of this, took him to court or whatever, sued him, whatever they gave him, and they were basically looking for $20,000, $20,300 exactly in damages, and the way they calculated it actually was in terms of the amount of games and consoles he sold. So for each system, he was charged $800, and for each game, he was charged $200. And for the amount of things he was selling or whatever, amounted up to, I think, 16,000 some odd dollars, and then he had to pay for the court damages as well, or the court fines of somewhere around $3,500. Adds up to about $20,300. Interesting. The thing is, I mean, what this tells us more than anything, especially because I just posted that PSN documentary about the 2011 PSN outages, and in the prior moments of that that scenario back in 2011, Sony was trying to go after the infamous hacker GeoHot, who was initially famous for jailbreaking the iPhone. Then he had his eyes set on the PS3, and then so he and Fail Overflow were kind of doing some, jailbreak work on the PlayStation 3. Sony didn't like that, of course, because it opens the doors to PlayStation 3. And given that GeoHot was trying to avoid piracy, Sony still didn't like that, so they went after him. Infamously, the PSP had a lot of piracy on it. I mean, that system sold tons of hardware, not that much software. That was a very weird scenario. So Sony is still very vehemently against the cracking open of their hardware, and they're keeping their eyes wide open at trying to keep piracy off of their platforms, because they do have a pretty big history with it. So it just goes to show, even today on PS4, under new leadership and all these new roles, I mean, they don't like that shit. If you are in the business of, trying to jailbreak PS4s, or, making custom firmware, pirating games, or what have you, you better do it under personal use and do not let Sony know what you're doing. Now, I'm only mentioning this news story because of the Sony conversation we can have off of it, but real quick, the Xbox rumor is that Microsoft will be revealing an Xbox One S all-digital version in April, and then for a release in May, somewhere around $150, $200 without a Blu-ray disc drive. All digital version, meaning you're just downloading content directly to the hard drive. I'm sure Microsoft's going to capitalize on Xbox Game Pass and things like that. It's an interesting rumor. It's actually quite old, but it looks like it's more substantiated. Looks like there's more reliability to the rumor, so it looks like this may actually happen. And it just sets a good precipice because, it's a really weird angle, I find, because Sony has certainly dipped into this before. With the PSP Go back in 2009, I think PSP Go came out, 2010. It was 2009, but the PSP Go was an all-digital PlayStation Portable. And, that was very ahead of its time for PSP. I mean, the PlayStation Store wasn't, that was tough back then. It was definitely ahead of its time, given that not every single game that released on PSP had a digital version come out for it. You couldn't transfer your physical UMDs to a digital version. So, that was kind of a mess. PSP Go really wasn't that successful whatsoever. It came out very expensive as well, so didn't really make a whole lot of sense for Sony at the time. But they've certainly explored that area. And it's funny because now that Microsoft's doing this, it's a very weird time, because we're in a situation where we're not only going more digital, but there's two forms of digital, which is storing content to locally to the hard drive. I mean, yes, there's no physical disk, but you've still got the file living on your hard drive, taking up 50, 60 some odd gigabytes of space. And then there's the streaming future that we are right in the cusp of having, apparently, as many publishers and developers are preaching, quote unquote, or all these other, outside companies joining in, like Google. Everybody's kind of looking at streaming as the next big thing. So it's like, why release a digital-only Xbox One? Now, certainly it's to test the waters. I mean, that's kind of obvious. I mean, this is very much a test unit, and Microsoft's going to have a lot of hurdles to jump over trying to sell this thing. I can't imagine it doing all that well. I mean, yes, every single game is available digitally, and yes, they have Xbox Game Pass, but the big thing here, of course, is trying to convey this message properly to consumers. I mean, when you've got a situation where people didn't know the difference between a Wii and a Wii U, and Wii U was a completely new platform that played completely new games. When you're in a situation where consumers don't know the difference between those two, how are you going to have a situation where Microsoft will properly convey the message? I mean, yeah, you can call it Xbox One S all digital version, but I'm guaranteeing you're going to have store returns, you're going to have complaints, you're going to have Microsoft's customer service line tied up trying to sell this thing, or people not understanding what it is or how it functions, why the discs don't go into the system, parents buying the wrong version of the game system for their kids because they saw it as the cheapest option, but they didn't understand that it didn't take discs and the kid wanted the ability to play with discs. We all know the rabbit hole of how difficult this could be, but it almost seems irrelevant to the point because, again, we're apparently moving towards this streaming only future. I mean, we don't need hard disk space when you're streaming the game. So I guess the real approach that they're kind of going for here is this third path where it's $150, $200 some odd box that will have a terabyte, 2 terabytes of space, and you've got the option as the consumer to either A, stream your games or just download them when you don't have the best internet connection, things like that. So maybe like a best of both worlds scenario, which is what Microsoft is going to try out. What will Sony do? I can't imagine they'd try anything like that with PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5 for that matter, because as it stands, based on rumors, PS5 will just be a 1 SKU box. That could, of course, change. I mean, we'll have more rumors certainly to discuss within the coming months, because that's just how the games industry is. We will certainly have Let's Talk PlayStations about PS5 rumors, and so we'll learn more about that later. But at least with Microsoft, they're certainly moving. They're moving. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to be doing this all digital Xbox One. Apparently, E3 is going to have next-gen consoles, and Sony's still pretty quiet, which is fine because they don't have to talk. They're still selling tons of PS4s. Microsoft's got to get the ball rolling, and here's just another thing that they're trying, another thing that they're throwing against the wall to see what sticks. But now let's get into Let's Talk Plus, our weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you could win a $10 PSN code. I'd like to congratulate Michael Pate. I don't know. I always get these weird names that I probably am pronouncing wrong, but you won. I'll be contacting you very soon on Twitter to send you your $10 code because I am paying for your games, or at least a portion of it, because games are expensive and understandably $10 isn't that much, but it's the most I can do every single week. Also, by the way, YouTube's got a new policy guideline with giveaways and links in the description. So as of right now, I'm not sure what's going to happen moving forward. We'll still do Let's Talk Plus. But basically with the Gleam website, I now have to remove the one that says you have to be subscribed to the channel. So good news, if you don't like me and you don't want to subscribe to me, you still get to enter for a $10 code. Well, really, you could have done that anyway. There are 3 separate entries. So if you follow on Twitch, that's an entry. If you can follow on Twitter, that's an entry. If you subscribe to the channel, that's an entry. Well, basically, you can't subscribe to the channel anymore for an entry. So now we only have 2 entries. Maybe I'll explore another entry or 2. I don't know. There's really nothing that interesting on Gleam. And really, I only use Gleam as a great way to keep track of winners and make sure it's 100% random, mind you. They're just the #1 sort of giveaway website to use. So just keep that in mind, that we may be in a scenario where the link might get removed, or maybe YouTube will do something. I don't know. I don't want to stop Let's Talk Plus. I want to keep doing it every single week. I want to keep paying for your games, but just letting you know, something might happen where maybe the link will die, or I might get a channel strike. You'll be the first to know if anything happens, but we'll try to figure out some way to do Let's Talk Plus. It's not going away. Those are all the news stories I want to talk about with you guys from this past week. So yes, on Tuesday, we finally did the new documentary, PlayStation Network Hack from 2011, the famous PSN outage. Go check it out if you haven't already, but most of you probably saw it. Thank you so much for all your overwhelming support on that documentary. Thankfully, it got a good amount of traction and views, and people are watching it. And so thank you for sharing it on Twitter and stuff like that. You guys are the best. I appreciate you so much. And yes, we are going to be doing many more documentaries. There's so many topics I want to do. A lot of you are throwing ideas at me, and trust me, I'm hearing all of them. I want to do all of them. Those videos just take so long to make. So as I mentioned in that video, if you could, any support on patreon.com/MysticRyan is greatly appreciated. Those help me justify the time a little bit more, so I can take a day or 2 off my regular day job for me to try and get a somewhat faster turnaround on the documentaries, because they can take upwards from 2 weeks to a month to make every single time I do one. So I love doing them, but just need to justify the time a little bit more. But anyway, thank you all so much for the support, and just, again, you guys are so cool. Because here's the thing, I'm not cool, but you, oh buddy, don't even get me started. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. I don't know what Tuesday's video is because I haven't even filmed it yet, so I'll probably do that Saturday or Sunday. So that, normally I have an idea of what I'm gonna upload that Tuesday, but now I don't even know. That's how much of a wild card that Tuesday video is. So as always, stay tuned to the channel. But that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Badecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me. I'll see you all next Friday.